Hello and welcome everyone to the Moonbeam Monday Lunch and Learn series. My name is Rebekah King and I am one of the brain changers from Moonbeam Monday Training and Coaching. It's great to see you excited, Kat. Thanks for joining us today. I'm here to help you unlock the secrets of behaviour change with neuroscience. And don't worry, there's not going to be a huge amount of sciencey speak. We do break things down into language that we can all understand, which is really important to us. So I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for being here live. And also, if you're watching the recording after the fact, thank you for being here also. So just a little bit about us. Moonbeam Monday is made up of me and my business partner, who also happens to be my mum, Yvonne. You can see her there on the screen. Now, in essence, we help people master their mind, empowering them to move past obstacles that have previously held them back from achieving what they want most. And we help them discover this renewed sense of purpose. And we do this by helping them retrain their brain with neurolinguistics through individual one-on-one coaching, as well as organizational team training. Now, why am I here talking to you about this? Well, I spent more than 20 years working in the corporate and professional world in a variety of industries. And of course, when I was in it, I could see that there were problems, but I was always a bit too close to see what the real problems were. And now that I've stepped away from that environment, I'm going back to help people in quite a different capacity, because over those years, I've seen that there are three big issues that just don't seem to go away. And they are that everyone is stressed, people are riddled with anxiety, and this sense of overwhelm, this overused word of overwhelm, it's really killing our culture. And most of us, either personally or in the workplace, we do three things to try and change this or to overcome the problem. So first of all, we change our environment. Okay, so personally, that might look like moving house. We might change jobs. We might even move the office around if we're in a workplace, or we do something similar. And it might work for a while, but the problem's still there. The stress, the anxiety, the overwhelm. So we think, oh, okay, it's me. I need to change my behaviour. So we quit old habits, we start new ones. If we're at work, we might write new policies and procedures. But again, the problems are still there. And so we think, oh, I know, I need to upskill. I need a new skill, right? I need more knowledge. Kat, you can relate. So we learn something new. We go back to uni, or we do a course, or we've got some sort of professional development going on. But the problem is still there. We're still stressed, we're still anxious, we're still overwhelmed. And why is that? Because when we change these three things, we're not actually getting to the root cause of the problem. We're actually just trying to fix a surface issue. So the work that we do, it actually goes a lot deeper. We help people and workplaces get to the root cause of those difficult to describe people and culture problems. And where does it all begin? It begins with understanding how your mind works. Okay, because when you understand this, why you think, say, and do the things that you do and how to change them, you experience a transformation you would never see when simply addressing the surface issues. And so that's what we're all about, and that's why we're here today. So what we're going to cover today is how the brain is hardwired. We're going to talk about the function of the brain and the different levels of the brain, conscious versus unconscious, and the neuroscience of behaviour change. So we're going to start with a little bit of science, right? So the brain, it's the origin of all learning, all thoughts, all emotions, all of the functions of our body. And its neurons or its cells generate signals that transmit information through the brain and through the body, okay? And it was once thought that as humans, we're unable to form new neural pathways as we reached maturity. But in fact, the study of neuroscience proves otherwise. And that's why we wanted to share this with you today. So the brain is actually plastic, or in other words, we're able to make changes and form new neural pathways well into old age. Now, we know this, okay? None of us are kids, none of us are teenagers here today. we know that we can learn new things, no matter what our age. But when it comes to the brain, scientists say it is all a matter of connections. Okay, it's about how billions of neurons talk to each other to create the reason, the memory, and the emotions that make us all distinct. So the physical circuitry of the brain, it actually contains about 100 billion neurons. And to put that into context, as you can see on the slide, that's as many cells as there are stars in the Milky Way. Yeah, it is quite an astounding fact, isn't it, Kat? And they are linked by about 150 trillion or so synapses. So to share what a synapse is, so of course this is the sciencey bit. A synapse, it's a pocket of space between two cells. You can see it in the picture on the screen, and they pass messages to communicate. So I like to use a bit of a visual example of this. If you think about two mobile phones, so you've got a mobile phone, I've got a mobile phone. The synapses are the radio waves that are transmitting the conversation that we're having. Okay, so we know that the brain is a really complex organ and it controls everything, like every process that regulates our body. It connects to the spine, and of course it is part of the central nervous system. And its main functions are to take in and process all of that sensory information that we're receiving, control homeostasis, voluntary movement, memory, learning. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that term homeostasis, that is a state of balance among all the body systems needed for the body to survive and function properly. So as you can see, the neurons or the cells in the nervous tissue, they're the basic unit of our nervous system, and they are the key players in the brain. They act as those information messengers, right? So they're generating signals that transmit information over long distances. So they're sending those messages to all different parts of the brain, as well as the spinal cord and all over the body. And it's the complexity of our neuronal networks that give us all our individual personalities and consciousness. So I know that is a little bit sciencey, talking about cells and neurons, but it is important to know just a little bit about the brain and what's going on in order to understand the science behind behavior change. Yes, really interesting stuff. I'm glad you find that interesting, Kat. And we could dive a lot deeper into that. In fact, in our Brain Changer workshop, we actually talk about this at least for a good hour because it is fascinating. So I want to share with you the three main layers of the brain. And so I've got a very simple picture up on the presentation. And in this, you can really see the layers of evolution here. You can see the base of your brain. Okay, this is the most primitive part of your brain. And in the picture, you can see it's the reptilian brain, or a little crocodile there. You might have heard it called the lizard brain, also the fast brain. My mentor, one of my mentors, Jodie, she calls it the jerk Jodie brain. Okay, so mine is the jerk Beck brain. It's that impulsive part of the brain, the defensive part. You know, when we perceive that we're in danger, we react. That's a reptilian response. So think about this. We've got this little crocodile, not so little crocodile. We've got this big crocodile swimming down the river, and it sees something that it wants to eat, and it just goes, oh, and it eats it, right? It gets it. Does the crocodile feel guilty? No. It's a primary impulsive survival part of his brain. Does he worry about what's going to happen if he eats me? No. Is he worried about what you think of him eating you, or what your family are going to think about him eating you? Of course not. The crocodile, that reptilian part of the brain, he's purely thinking, in order to survive, I must eat. Food equals survival. There's no meaning, there's no emotion, empathy, there's absolutely no care factor. Then around that, we've got the mammalian part of the brain. So we're mammals, it's the mammalian part of the brain, and this is where the puppies come into it. So I want you to think about white fluffy puppies. Cat, I know that you're a dog lover, so you'll love this part. Now puppies, right, they just want to fit in. They're programmed to survive by being part of a pack or a herd or a crowd. In our case, crowd, there's safety in numbers. So here, I just want you to consider the difference between reptiles and mammals. So reptiles, they're cold-blooded. They birth eggs. Their eggs hatch. And they're left to fend for themselves and go off into the world to survive. So it's like, Mum says, I've laid my eggs, you're on your own. So mammals, they're warm-blooded, right? So they give birth to live young and they feed, they suckle them, and then they go off into nature. So there's a lot more nurturing happening there. But as a community, they travel through life in a herd to stay safe, okay? Because there's safety in numbers for mammals, including ourselves. We see safety in numbers. So think about how we as humans respond when fear is at play. Okay, so when we anticipate fear or when we feel fear, we usually have that knee-jerk attack, whether it's in the way that we respond with words or we run away and hide. That's that knee-jerk reaction. That's that reptilian reaction. Or we can actually be cliquey or bitchy, or we can blend in with the people around us because of our mammalian desire to belong. All right, think about teenage girls at school, right? They move around in packs, right? Just like wolves, dogs, any herd animals. Now, it's instinctive because of the way that our brain is made up. It's not wrong and it's not bad. It's just these primal behaviours that happen. Then there's the human layer. Okay, this is the cerebral cortex and the frontal lobe. It gives us the ability to make decisions, rationalize, and create meaning. And that's a really interesting point. We are the only species on the planet that creates meaning around the things that go on in our life. No other species does that. So what's interesting is that we've got this crocodile, puppy, and human all vying together in our brain to get through life. And sometimes the messages can get a little bit mixed up. And that's often why we react in a way that kind of can surprise us sometimes. You know, have you ever had that reaction to something and you've sort of gone, hang on, why did that happen? That's a bit weird. It's because some of these messages get mixed. It can have us create meaning about things that aren't really there. So have a think about that in your own life. Has anybody ever said something to you and you've taken offense to it? Yeah, I can see. Yeah, absolutely. Me too. And I'm generalizing here, but most times people don't go out to offend you, do they? They don't say things to offend you, but we put a meaning around it. You've got a story about that with your mum? Yep. I might ask you about that later. Yes, we have all been in that situation. And it's this meaning that we put around things that can actually, you know, create some of these issues. So I want to tell you about a client that I had. So this client, he was really easily hurt by what other people would say to him and how they would react. Now, he is a really smart, well-educated man, and logically, he knows that the other person may not mean anything, but he gets wounded very, very easily, and he gets defensive, or at least he used to. And we worked together in individual coaching, and what we began to uncover is that he had this experience in childhood that continued to affect him throughout his whole life, and he didn't even know it. He didn't realize this. So he's very, very good at athletics. And the way that he told me is that he had never not come first in any sports activity. And at an athletic carnival one year at school, he was doing the hurdles and halfway through he tripped and fell. Now, he's on the ground and the whole school that was watching this hurdle race erupted in cheers and applause. Okay, and he's lying on the ground thinking, oh my goodness, they're cheering because I've fallen over. And what happened is that he had this overwhelming emotion, and what it turned out to be was fear. And he stored this emotion in him because that's what we do. We make a choice, seems weird, but it is a choice of ours, to store this fear inside our body and inside our unconscious mind. He was so hurt by this reaction of the whole entire school. He didn't understand it. But as a result, he spent his whole life taking things personally. Excuse me. Excuse me. But when we did some work on this and we gave him a whole new perspective on this event, he realized that they weren't actually being mean to him, or they weren't cheering because he'd fallen over. What actually happened is that they were simply pleased that for the first time, somebody else was going to get a chance to win. So they weren't cheering because he'd fallen over. They were cheering for the person who suddenly got in front of him and was running toward the finish line. But unfortunately, he had stored this other emotion. And so that had created this, or caused him to be really easily hurt in situations where he really needn't have been. This was the primate part of his brain, placing meaning around something that it didn't need to. And I'm sure we can all relate to having done that. Now, the great news is that now that he's realized this and we've done some of the work to help him move past it, he no longer takes things personally and he doesn't feel wounded by just about every single thing. Things have changed for him in a big way. And yeah, Kat, you're saying I carried my story for over 30 years. Exactly. And that's what a lot of us do. These things happen early on in our childhood, in our teenage years, and we don't realize how much it's affecting us. And like you said, 30 years. For this guy, it was about 25 years. So we carry these things for us with a long time. And it's not until we start being opened up to things like this and learning about this that we realize all of these stories that we're carrying along with us. So these patterns, your brain is creating all these patterns in your life, and that's what can stop you from achieving the things that you really want. Or they can simply be causing you to create a reactional response that you don't want or you don't need, instead of a calm, considered approach to something. So there are things that we can do to train our brain to behave differently. And these are the types of things that we teach in our Brain Changer program. We give you the knowledge to help you identify the root cause. So for that particular client, the root cause, it was that day at the athletics carnival. And then we give you the tools to help you change them. And that can bring about incredible transformation, like Kat, because you're very familiar, you're an NLP practitioner yourself. You know that when we change these stories, when we let go of those things from the past, that it can have a huge impact on our life. Cool. So I mentioned the unconscious mind briefly before. So I just want to touch on the conscious and unconscious mind. And for anybody who is here today or is watching the recording and you've attended our Mindshift Mastery event, you'll be familiar with this concept. So, I forgot a slide there. We're talking about consciousness. So consciousness, it's our personal thoughts and experiences, okay? And it actually differs from our actual brain. And to help explain this a little, I'm going to use the example of somebody who's been paralyzed. So take the spinal cord, for example. It's about 1.5 foot long flexible tube of nervous tissue inside the backbone, and it's got about 1 billion nerve cells. Now, if the spinal cord is completely severed by trauma to the neck region, this person is paralyzed in the arms, the legs, the torso. They don't have control over their bowel or their bladder, and they're without bodily sensations. Yet, they continue to experience life with all its variety. They still have all their senses, they see, hear, smell, feel emotions, and they remember things from before the accident. So I guess you could ask, what is the difference between the brain and the mind? Well, these two terms, they are often used interchangeably and they are associated, but of course the brain is a physical thing. You know, a surgeon can touch it, can operate on it. It's visible and it can be damaged. While the mind is described as our intellectual or our psychological rational part of us, and it can't actually be touched or seen in the same way. So essentially our mind is that medium through which everything we experience, it flows through. And it's really the sum of all of our experiences, all of our thoughts, memories, images, bodily sensations, and all of our senses. And we have 3 levels, and you'll see those on the screen now. So it's kind of like an iceberg. Okay, the conscious mind at the top, which is above the surface, it's everything that you're currently aware of. That might be thoughts, feelings, or memories that you're currently thinking of right now. But interestingly enough, it only equates to approximately 5% of your mind. Then you've got the subconscious, which is just below the surface, just a tiny bit below the surface. And this is the part of the unconscious that's not currently in focal awareness. And then you've got the unconscious, which is that large majority under the surface. And that consists of the processes in your mind that occur automatically. They're not available to introspection, and they include those thought processes, memory, affect, and motivation. And it's the unconscious that makes up about 95% of your mind, approximately. So when you think about that, that means that only 5% of what you think, say, and do at any time is conscious. Does that surprise anyone? 5%, yeah. So all the stuff that's going on in the background, we say on autopilot. Who's ever said that? Yeah, I just did that on autopilot. That you're not even aware of until you begin paying attention. So think of all of those things: breathing, blinking, even talking. You know, we don't even have to think about what we're saying most of the time. It just comes out. Even things like driving, because we do it so often, it becomes something that we do on autopilot. It's unconscious. And when you realize this and you become aware, that's when you realize that you can take control and, in fact, retrain your brain to think, say, and do anything that you want. That's pretty powerful stuff, isn't it? So it's not always easy, granted, but it is actually very simple. So I want to talk about how change actually occurs. So who's heard that saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks? Yeah. Okay. What might be more accurate to say is you can't teach an old dog new tricks if they don't want to learn. All right. So that's the fundamental part of the work that we do with people, is that if you want to change something, you actually have to want to change it. If you want to learn something, you have to want to learn it. Yes, Kat saying you can lead a horse to water, but if you try to force him to drink, all you get is a drowned horse. I've never heard it quite put like that, but you're exactly right. That's right. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You can drown him. Absolutely. So here's what happens in our brain when it comes to changing behavior. So throughout our childhood and our teenage years, our brains grow and change naturally, undergoing drastic changes, right? We all know that. And at around the age of 25, our brain stops naturally forming new neural pathways. And our habits, our biases, and our attitudes, they become more set in stone and much harder to change. That's not impossible to change. We all know that. We're all sitting here. We know we've made changes. We can learn new things. But it tends to become a little bit harder as we get older, right? So this is where neuroplasticity comes into play. So I mentioned at the beginning that our brain is plastic. So neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to change itself constantly by creating new neural pathways and losing those which are no longer used. And we call this neural pruning. Now, I like to explain neural pathways with a bit of a visual. So think about this. You decide that you want to go on a hike. Okay, so you drive to, you decide that you're going to go and see a waterfall. You drive to the forest or the woods or whatever you want to call it, that you're going to hike to the waterfall. You get out of your car, you get your stuff, and you walk over to the path. And there's a very clear path there. There's even a sign that says, "This way to the bottom of the waterfall." And you can see that many people have gone there before you. There's trees and shrubs on either side, but they're all pushed back, making it very easy for you to get through. And the ground is well worn. Okay, so you go on your way down the path and you very easily get to the bottom of the waterfall. But then one day you get to the car park and you decide, do you know what? I don't want to go to the bottom of the waterfall anymore. It's not fulfilling me any longer. I want to go to the top of the waterfall because I'm going to get a whole new perspective, a whole different view when I get to the top of the waterfall. So you look to the right-hand side of where you are and you think, you know what? I can get to the top of the waterfall if I go that way. But you've never been that way before. Nobody's ever been that way before. And it's all overgrown. There's no sign pointing to it, but you know that you can get there if you go that way. And so what you do is you pull out your tools and you start hacking away. So you start creating this pathway for you to get to the top of the waterfall. You have to push some shrubs back, you have to hack off some branches, and you have to tread a path on the ground. And you keep coming back day after day to create this path. And eventually you make your way through, you clear a path, and you get to the top of the waterfall. And it's like, wow, this is a whole new view, a totally different perspective. And what you find is that because you've been spending time hacking away and you've created this nice pathway, it's now well trodden, there's no trees or shrubs holding you back. When you look at the old pathway, it's actually started to become overgrown. The sign's fallen down, there's vines growing over the ground, the trees are now starting to cave in because you're not using that path anymore. You've created a new path. That is essentially what creating a neural pathway in your brain is like. Okay, so we've all got these well-worn pathways, let's call them habits, in our mind. And if we want to create a new habit or do something differently, we have to use the tools that we have to hack away a new path and create a new habit. And in the sciencey terms, a neural pathway is a series of connected neurons that send signals from one part of the brain to another. So does that analogy make sense to everyone? Yeah. So next time you're trying to change something or create a new habit, I want you to think of that path to the waterfall. That's essentially what you're doing. And so encouraging the brain's neuroplasticity, it's the key to sustained adult learning and emotional intelligence. And it helps your brain remain open-minded and intuitive and able to overcome those biases throughout adulthood. And, you know, we're told a lot of the time as we get older, we've got to keep our brain functioning. You know, we've got to do things like Sudoku or crossword. But it's not as simple as that, okay? I mean, those things are great. But, of course, you're still doing the same thing over and over again. So for the brain to rewire itself, it requires sustained practice of a new behaviour, because that's going to sufficiently challenge the brain to think in a new way. So it's about doing new things, mixing things up. If you consider, who here has learned a new language or a musical instrument? Yeah? Okay, yeah. Consider how hard that was. It's difficult, isn't it? This is how hard your brain needs to work to stimulate growth and forge new neural pathways. And those neural pathways, excuse me, they're comprised of neurons and they're connected by these things called dendrites. And they're created in the brain based on our habits and our behaviours. And the number of dendrites actually increases with the frequency and a behaviour is performed. So I want you to think of a bodybuilder, and I've put a nice picture there for you so that you don't even have to imagine it. He's right there. Right, so think of this bodybuilder. He builds up muscle tone and strength over time by repetition of the same exercises. So he does the same thing day in, day out, and eventually creates a body like the one you see on the screen. And psychologist Dean Ware, he actually explained that when brain cells communicate frequently, the connection between them strengthens and the messages that travel the same pathway in the brain over and over begin to transmit faster and faster. So think of all of those things. I mentioned a few of them before, like reading, driving, riding a bike, all as examples of these complicated behaviours that we do automatically because neural pathways have formed. One of the first ones that we did was walking. Walking is actually us having created a neural pathway. You don't think about it anymore, do you? You just get up and you walk. Or you just tie your shoelace. All of these are all examples of neural pathways. So you have done it before, you can do it with anything. And with enough repetition, these behaviours become automatic. Okay, they're that unconscious mind at work. And as we either, what's Kat saying? If you actually think about tying your shoelace, it's like you can't remember how. Yeah, exactly. Sometimes if you put too much thought into these things, it becomes complicated. And so that's where, when we're creating a new habit, if we do it over and over and over and over again, consistency, of course, that's when it becomes one of those things that we do on autopilot. You're absolutely right, Kat. So as we either participate in new activities or we start thinking differently, we're actually training our brains to create these new neural pathways. Yes, like our PIN numbers. Oh, you're so right. PIN numbers and passwords. Have you ever stood at the ATM and gone, what's my PIN number? Yeah, put too much thought into it and you can't remember it, even though it's a number that you've used probably, thousands of times. I do that with my passwords. If somebody asks you what your password is, I can't tell them. But if I sit in front of the keyboard and I just type it in, I can do it, right? Because I've created that neural pathway, that behavior, because I've done it so many times. And so we either participate in these new activities or we start thinking differently. We're actually training our brains to create those new neural pathways. And they become stronger and stronger the more that they're repeated. Now, I often get asked, how long does it take to create a new habit? Can anyone tell me how long it takes to create a new habit? You can type it in the chat or come off mute. 20 days, okay. Anyone else think anything different to 20 days? Right, okay. So, yeah.
I was going to say, I think it takes as long as you take to make it a regular practice. So depending on how regular you are in creating that habit or thought, then it's going to take as long as that takes. So I guess the bottom line is, the more frequently you practice something or think it, the quicker it's going to be.
Yeah, really good point. Absolutely. And you're right, it is actually different for everyone. Kat, you say, I think the traditional thought is a month to erase an old habit and 3 weeks or 21 days to establish a new one. You're absolutely right. That is the traditional thought, or the urban legend, or the myth. And for some people, it does take 21 days, but we are all different. It is estimated that it takes 3 to 6 months for a new behavior to become one of those unconscious habits. So there's the newest research that I have read, for some people, it can take, 20 odd days. But for some people, it can take upward of 200 days. So the average, according to that particular study, is 66 days. So let's say 2 months. So if you have something, a new habit that you want to create, a new neural pathway that you want to create, you can make it a reality in 2 months. But like Yvonne said, if you're consistent with it, it's not a matter of doing it once today and a couple of times on the weekend and then maybe once or twice next week. It's about doing it every day, maybe even several times a day, consistently, before it becomes one of those unconscious habits. Yeah.
I hope I'm not preempting anything that you are going to say, but perhaps even in relation to thoughts that we want to get rid of, we might find often that we are thinking something, like it might be a sad thought or an anxious thought or something that causes us a lot of unhappiness, and it's always churning over in our mind. So it's got a lot to do with awareness, because as soon as we're aware of that, we have to stop that thought process. And if we continually don't allow our mind to be in charge like that, but to take charge ourselves, then we're going to have we're going to be able to conquer those thoughts much quicker.
Yeah, precisely. And you're right, it does all come down to being aware of these things. And this, as you know, we go into so much more detail about this in our workshops. So we've only got, 45 minutes today. We're only covering the surface here. And you're right, Kat, it takes as long as it takes, as long as it needs to, as long as it takes to stop resisting it. You're right. So that's the thing. It is extremely hard to change a habit. Like we said at the beginning, if you want to change something, you have to want to change it. So, you could take the example, because it's quite a common one, of somebody who wants to quit smoking. Now, they have to have a very good reason for wanting to quit smoking. But quite often, smokers really enjoy it for whatever reason. They enjoy the social side of it, or they enjoy how it makes them feel. So, of course, there's that resistance there. So it does take effort and being able to change the way that you think about it to be able to change that habit. You say, I really want good food habits, but I resist because I love my carbs. I think that's a really common one, Kat, absolutely. And there's so much more to it when it comes to food and diet and exercise. It's all of those things that we can unlock in the mind that are perhaps creating that resistance. And of course, when we like something, it's really hard to give it up. Now, I use the example of potato chips, a personal example for me. I love potato chips, and I used to eat them a lot. And I don't just mean like a packet here and there. It had become quite an unhealthy obsession for me. And it wasn't until I had a coach help me change something in my brain that I was actually able to stop eating them. And when I say stop eating them, I went from devouring a packet a night in bed, feeling shameful, to like that, switched it off. I couldn't bear thinking about them. I couldn't walk down the supermarket aisle that they were in. I would have a physical reaction when I thought about them, because I was able to change something in my brain. And sometimes it takes something quite drastic like that to turn us off that. So if you're working on creating a new habit, whether it be building strength, changing the way you eat, changing the way you do something, or even changing your language, keep going. Okay, don't give up after 21 days thinking, oh, well, I've done it for 21 days and it hasn't worked. It's a different time frame for everyone, and there are multiple things at play here. So the more you do it, of course, you will eventually create that new neural pathway, like the one walking up to the top of the waterfall. You'll have more dendrites and it will become more of an automatic response. And the science is there to prove it. And if you saw my post on Facebook last night about cycling, that's what I've done with cycling. Oh my goodness, Kat just wrote that, like your bike riding up the big hills. Exactly. A year ago, there is no way I could have ridden up Chandler's Hill. I wouldn't have even thought about it. I liked riding on the flats, and that was enough for me. I mean, I was strong, but not for hills. So I have been riding hills for a little while now, but it's taken me a year to get to the point where I can do it without stopping too much, without feeling like I'm going to have a heart attack, and without having that thought in my mind that I want to give up. Okay. And I think, like I wrote in that post, we're so used to instant gratification these days of things not taking too long. I can put a post up and I can get 10 likes within 30 seconds. And we're so used to things or wanting things to happen fast that we're often not willing to put the time and the effort in. But if you're willing to put the time and the effort in, amazing things can happen, like being able to ride up a really big hill. So we're coming to the end. So what have we learned today? We have talked about how the brain is hardwired. So you now know that the brain contains approximately 100 billion neurons, or about the same as the number of stars in the Milky Way. Incredible amount. The change is from saying I can't do something to I can. Yes, okay. Change can be as simple as changing the language. I can't do this to changing it to I can. Or it might be even adding that word yet. I love that word yet. It can change everything. Instead of I can't ride up a hill, I can't ride up a hill yet, but I'm working toward doing it, and this is what I'm doing to make that possible. Absolutely. So we know that neurons are essential for every action that our brain and body can carry out, and it's the complexity of these neuronal networks that gives us our individual personalities and consciousness. And creating the affirmation, I'm so grateful that I am now able to. Yeah, absolutely. We've got to celebrate these wins, don't we? Sometimes I think when we achieve something, we just blow past it. We're like, oh, okay, yep, tick. We've put so much time and effort into trying to make it happen. And then when it happens, we don't celebrate it. But when we do, and when we create that gratitude in our own mind, that goes a long, long way to telling our brain, hey, this is okay. This is something that I can achieve. Let's go and do more. Yes, celebrating the little victories, gratitude creates so much energy, doesn't it? Absolutely. I love it. And so now we've also talked about the function of the brain. So we know that there's 3 parts of the brain. They're reptilian, the mammalian, and the primate brain. So think crocodile, then cute, fluffy white puppies, and then us, the human brain. So the reptilian brain is that jerk response, our initial response that must eat to survive. Then the mammalian brain, the puppy dog brain, that's our safety in numbers part of the brain. And then our primate brain, or our human brain, this is the meaning part of the brain. We are meaning-making machines. Okay, so it's safe to say that we get mixed signals between these 3. And then we know now that the brain and the mind are separate yet inseparable. And there are 3 levels. There's that conscious, which is only about 5% of our mind, then the subconscious, and then the unconscious, which is the large majority. And the neuroscience behind behaviour change, you know what a neural pathway is, and you've got a lovely little visual reminder about what a neural pathway is and how you can create a new one and forget the old one. We know that the number of dendrites increases with the frequency of behaviour, or the frequency that a behaviour is performed. And it really is like building a muscle. The more you do something, the easier it becomes. So don't give up. So I'd love to know if you want to pop it in the chat, or even if you want to come off mute and let us know What is your biggest takeaway from today? You might have had an aha. It might have been a reminder of something you already knew, but you went, oh, yeah, I'd forgotten about that. I'd love to know. Yes, Kat.
So much great information today. Thank you.
Welcome.
For me, I think the thing that kind of, because I've done a lot of study around all of this, so it's not unfamiliar, but I love your graphic visual of the three-part of the reptile, mammalian, and the primate one. I've never seen a visual like that, and it's freaking brilliant.
Yeah, thank you.
But the thing that kind of blew my mind was the numbers of the stars is equal to the number of sorry, losing words.
The neurons in the brain.
Neurons, thank you. But that just kind of blew my mind.
It's incredible, isn't it? Because we think of the Milky Way as this massive, expansive, uncountable thing, but that's what's happening in our brain as well. Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And I will just say that's not my graphic. I can't take ownership to that, but I love it too because it just breaks things down. Plus, it's a little bit fun. Yeah. Anybody else want to share anything, one of their biggest takeaways from today? Or, of course, if you're watching the recording, just having a think about that. Oh, okay. So that is just simply a little taster of what's possible when you learn how to master your mind. And we've just done that in 45 minutes. You know, and when you retrain your brain, a lot is possible. And of course, if you'd like to know more, we have our 2-day immersive workshop running in November, and it takes you on a deep dive, doing the work to really change your life. Or for some people, it's not about making massive changes. It's just about making some tweaks. So we offer this to individuals. It's for you individually. Or, of course, if you're watching this as part of a team from a workplace, and you've got somebody in your team who simply needs some support in their life, the brain changer might be for you because it's helping you understand what's driving your unconscious mind, you know, what you say, do, and think. It's about discovering those ways to get really easy results, like get the results that you want, rather than those default responses that you have that you perhaps don't even understand why you get those results. And it's about really creating real and lasting change by retraining your brain. So we do actually make real-time changes there in the room. It's a completely safe space, a very small group, like-minded people. And the best part, I think, about it is that you will walk away with this real practical toolkit that you can use for the rest of your life. And people who have been in the past, they even use these things. They take these tools and teach them to their family, their loved ones, or other people at work. So it's like you keep giving. You can help the people around you. So anyone here today or anybody watching this recording, if you do book for our November workshop, The Brain Changer, you can actually access the early bird price just by using the code on the screen, Brain Changer 1. And that's on our website, moonbeammonday.com.au, The Brain Changer. There's a couple of hyphens in there. And there's more details about The Brain Changer, or of course, you're welcome to get in contact and ask me about it. So that is all for today. I hope you've enjoyed this Moonbeam Monday Lunch and Learn session. We are running these every fortnight with a different topic. So be sure to register for each one if you want to come along. The next one will be on Tuesday, the 17th of October at 12 o'clock Adelaide time. And we're talking about, in that one, navigating workplace challenges beyond the surface. So this one will be looking at discovering how the core values shape your experience at work, understanding your beliefs and how they influence your responses to a workplace situation, and then exploring how your identity impacts your ability to thrive in the workplace. So it is directed to the workplace, but of course, all of these things are relevant in your personal life as well. And also next Wednesday, we will be running our Mindshift Mastery workshop, so keep an eye out for that as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you've taken away some valuable information, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. And bye for now.